Alright, everybody, welcome back to this episode of We Mortal Coils. I literally do not remember what episode number this is. It might be episode 40? Might be.
No.
If
I
it
don't
is,
think we're there yet. I think we're in the late 30s.
late 30s?
30s,
Alright, well, we are
37
on our...
maybe?
Why did you
episode
say
what?
late 30s as though this podcast is aging? You know, we're in the upper 30s. You know what I mean?
Oh, well,
Oh, yeah.
Well, if
Either
it tells
way,
me anything
there we
about where
are.
my mind's been.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll keep on moving our way forward. We are back after a long or semi delay. We were gone for a bit. I went on vacation. Everybody got busy, and generally speaking, we're glad to be back, and we'll be doing things again following this episode. Maybe not as frequently, but we'll be around, and you'll see us year round. Anyway, without further ado, we can jump on into this topic. The topic question being, topic question, not so much a question as much a discussion, specifically around David Chalmers. A lot of people in the audience, I'm going to guess, actually already know that name. He's a very famous philosopher in philosophy of mind. He's kind of well known as a panpsychist guy. Bray would know more about the stuff he's doing more recently, where he gets into virtual reality and talking about like the substantive quality of virtual reality right now and in the future. But we're going to talk about something he did, I believe, in 2004, an article or an essay he wrote called Consciousness and Its Place in Nature. Now, I read this paper way back when in college, sophomore year, and I went, neat. And I really liked it. And then I kind of put it away mentally until this episode. We were looking for something to do. Our last episode we did on rationalities with Wolfgang Welsh was wonderful. That was one of my favorite episodes of all time. It was a wonderful discussion.
I like
So,
I like that one.
It was so
mentioning
good.
that this
and we
is
had so much to say.
Yeah, that this is an
we're gonna
essay
have more to
review
say on this one.
episode. So by previous episode, Trevor means the last episode we did around an essay.
Yes, that is correct. Bray is correct. And we did that essay episode, and I really enjoyed it. So this is essentially another, this one covering consciousness, specifically types of approaches to the hard problem of consciousness. So for this episode, I was thinking we'd first discuss what we mean by consciousness. In this sense, the definition we're going to be using is phenomenal consciousness. We'll get into that. The hard problem of consciousness, which is derived from phenomenal consciousness as a definition. And then I would say, let me think, 3, 4, 5, 6 different approaches that David Chalmers gives in his essay towards this hard problem of consciousness. We're going to have a lot of random conjecture, a lot of disagreement, a lot of bickering, and I'm really excited. So before we get right into it, I'd first like to welcome our special guest with this episode. He's getting less special each time he comes on. I'm just letting you know. Just think, because it's just you're here. You're just another
Market
one.
value is rapidly decreasing.
Seriously, it's like
Supply and demand. Right?
Yeah, we're like macaroni, and you're
I need
going
to make
from gold
myself
bars
scarce.
into
Right.
you're a scarce commodity.
I have to artificial the scarcity.
Nice, but Michael, it's good to have you back. How are you feeling?
Good. Chipper.
Fair enough.
Ready to
think
talk
about
about
this,
everyone's favorite topic.
What do you think about this essay?
I enjoyed it. I would have had a better take on it the bit ago when we were originally going to cover this, but I enjoyed it. It was interesting. It felt very fast and loose at certain points.
Yes.
All right.
But where Stephen where Stefan is absolutely incredulous about all things, I am overtly too credulous about many things. So
all right, that's a great start to an episode. Let's go on to Stefan. How'd you feel?
Well, I got a haircut. You know,
it looks good.
looks like curly.
I got the haircut, and then I said, "This is the first time I've felt my cheeks since 10th grade."
Nice.
You know, and then first time I've seen my upper lip in a while. You know, all of which are my own little experiences, right? Y'all have no basis by which to understand what I'm talking about, right?
Right.
You swear that? Anyway,
No
We're going to be
basis.
talking about Chalmers, and fast and loose is the best way to apply it. Like
Those
the
are your
best-
qualia.
Yeah. My qualia this past week, bullshit.
What it's like to be a Stefan.
Yeah. But
Beautiful.
look, I enjoyed reading it. It felt like my palms were being read, but I enjoyed reading it. Of course, I'm being hyperbolic, but like only a little. So anyway, I think we're gonna be talking about a lot this time for sure.
And there goes Stefan saying exactly what we wanted him to say.
I know,
it's
like
just
before
so
the
good.
episode, people, dear audience, dear listeners, Trevor and I were talking about this. I was like, we need to table this. We need to bring this up during podcasts so that people can understand. We really are different people. That's all there is to it.
We just relish the differences. And
Yeah.
with that in mind, Bray, with the fantastical haircut and the magnificent background again, I'm curious how you felt about this essay.
So yeah, I've enjoyed reading it. I finally got my printer working so I can print out all these essays, and now I'm like on a kick, and I'm like, oh, like those memes where it's like my boyfriend won't stop downloading every PDF he finds online. Like I can't wait to read
I
this
need to
later, and
print.
it's like thousands of PDFs. Anyways, yeah, the essay was a fun read, although there were definitely, and I think this is shared by at least one or a couple of the rest of you perhaps, there were points in here where I started reading something and I was like, is this really the point we're gonna
Is this the hill?
try to make?
Right.
Right.
Is this real?
But no, having read some of David Chalmers before, I definitely understand I guess the writing style or where he's coming at with some of this. I've kind of found that he will entertain a lot of different perspectives whenever writing on a subject, so that may be why there are certain things that are kind of caught my attention. But yeah, I'm very excited. I don't talk about consciousness a lot, so
Great.
hopefully we've got some. I know we have a devoted person here, so
I feel like, all right, this is a weird reference, but in the 90s, Pee-wee's or 80s, Pee-wee's Playhouse, whenever someone says the secret word and everyone freaks the fuck out, you just said the secret word. You said consciousness. Now we have to get into that.
We need to take a shot every time someone says the word consciousness. You know what I mean?
That's like number 7. All right,
Yeah,
we're on our
Dangerous
way.
game.
It's a very dangerous game. So you just said the magic word, Bray. So we're going to get into the definition of consciousness for this episode. Now, whenever you discuss consciousness, you could spend a lifetime just defining consciousness. Like, what is consciousness? That question. And that's all well and good, but then we can't talk about anything else. And like, honestly, we're here for other reasons. So I'm going to give a definition for consciousness for you based on this essay. It won't be satisfactory because it never will be. And we're just going to work with that. We're going to try to see if we can break it. If you want to break it right now, you're more than welcome to do so. But this is essentially the definition that a lot of philosophy of mind work does today. Not all of it, but a lot. It is this definition under phenomenal consciousness. Now, let me describe it to you like this. I want you to imagine myself, Trevor, in a room with you right now. Sorry, I'm getting weird. And then there's another thing, a Trevor mannequin. It has a mustache. It has a bad haircut. It's wearing a Hawaiian. It smells off. And basically, I want you to approach both the mannequin and me, and I want you to go up. I want you to flick both of us directly on the right eyeball, like this, Now, I have designed
How
this
many
mannequin.
times?
I just did it twice, so we'll say twice.
Yeah, twice.
Like in quick succession, so it's one instance, really. Anyway, you do it to me, and I will say the word ouch, like aggressively. And also there will be pain. Like I will go, fuck. And there's these lights going on behind me. This is an explicit episode this time. And then I want you to do it to the mannequin. Now I've specifically designed this mannequin to elicit noises. I go up and I flick this mannequin. It is designed, if it is touched, to say the exact same thing. Ouch. Do the exact same thing to the mannequin. Now, there's a difference here. Is there not? Just based on, let's just speak on intuition at first. Just be very vague about it, and we'll touch on the specifics later. There's a something happening inside of me, an experience of pain that comes with the ouch. And then there's the mannequin. Now, intuitively, we could really get into this, and we're going to get it in the monism section towards the end. But we're just going to say for now that with the mannequin, when you flick the mannequin's pupil, there is nothing. It's just, it says there is a sound ouch after you do this. While for me, I say the exact same thing. I have a body, I have a being, and I go ouch. But there's this feeling of ouch. There's pain. That is to say, there is something it is like to be a Trevor. There is a somethingness happening. You can think of it a bit like a binary switch. It's either you have this or you don't have it. There either is something it is like to be me, Trevor, or there is not, such as the mannequin. There is not something it is like to be a mannequin. It doesn't have a phenomenon happening inside, a mental thing happening in the intuitive sense. And that is our definition for this episode. So we can talk about that really briefly for now, and then we're going to go into the hard problem of consciousness, which is essentially rooted in this one definition. So I'd like to start with Michael, because you'll always have a slight look of suspicion about you, and I want to like you look like, that's suspicious, and I want to see exactly what the suspicion is.
Well, I don't have one right now. I'm trying to remember all the parts of this essay. So as far as the mannequin, I mean, there is something going on in there. You have wiring or something, or otherwise that little speaker box or whatever wouldn't be able to. So the impulse is carried from whatever sensors in the eye out through some wires into a speaker box. So there's something going on there. We don't have a way of relating to the mannequin such that it can convey that there is something being experienced by a something experiencing it, but there is a physical phenomena going on there. In the same way that for you, Trevor, there is a physical phenomena going on there. So I wanted to like kind of highlight how they're similar in a way.
It's we really, whenever you define this thing, phenomenal consciousness, it's really quite difficult, because in the next couple of steps, like towards when we get into the 6 different ways that David Chalmer tries to approach the problem, there are ways that he approaches the problem which essentially invalidate this whole mannequin example I'm currently giving. It's not a very good example in that sense as we go on later, but it's an okay way of intuitively seeing what I'm trying to say. There's something it's like
intuitive.
To be Trevor.
It's intuitive in this way, to say it the most plain way for the audience. Just like Michael said, we cannot per se identify with the mannequin, right, or the android or whatever. It has no internalized experience, right? It just has an action reaction. If flicked, then reproduce these Trevor sounds,
Yes, and it's a bit like an assemblage. I can also think of it as a stairwell or something, like a collection of little things, and then I just elicit noise out of it. Is there something it is like to be this collection of things? That's another way you could look at it.
Do we want to save P zombies for when we hit to that particular topic, or is this a good introduction point?
We could actually, and if you bring it up right now, I'd love to hear your definition.
Hitting it off early.
P and Q zombies.
So the thing is, like, experientially, when you talk with other people, you have no real way of knowing that they have a consciousness. And so a P zombie, or a philosophical zombie, is this idea that, like, okay, well, what if they don't? What if the whole world is populated by these automata that have no internal experience, located within the physicality of the automata?
Is there something it is like to be an NPC?
Which is
a
fun, horrible idea.
Yeah,
terrifying in a way.
Yeah, it's a bit of a solipsistic point of view. I mean, you affirm the physical world, but then you say you're the only one substantive in it, in a sense. Well, unless you're talking about another world where all these people are. Which is what Chalmers says. So to build this up a little bit, this definition we're going with. So this idea of a zombie necessitates on the idea of phenomenal consciousness. You either have it or you don't. And it's this idea that you can perfectly replicate, or like, is it metaphysically possible that you could perfectly replicate the physicality of a being, such as Stefan? However, there is not something it is like to be that Stefan. This Stefan walks around, responds to things, or he responds to things. And if I come up and flick him in the eye, he has the exact same response. and he's just as judgmental of Chalmers as the real one is. But there's nothing it is like to be this second Stephen. The second Stephen has no inner qualities. Nothing. He looks as if he may. He looks as if he does, because he quite literally has all of the same responses as normal Stefan does, to such an extent that you could even say that you wouldn't be able to distinguish him from the original Stefan. But nothing's going on inside. There is nothing it is like to be Stefan 2. It's just barren. It's nothingness. It's just stuff. It's a weird thought.
I have significant gripes with this argument, but I'm wondering if I should talk about them now or later.
You should always talk about them now. If you push them forward, then they.
So I mean, like, it just occurs to me, like, okay. So we said that the P zombie, is that solipsistic idea that Trevor, Bray, and Michael could all be, not okay, go ahead. Automatons without consciousness, right? They could be P zombies. They could execute purposeful behavior. Maybe. Is that what we're saying?
Well, what we're saying is, what we really are saying is we're trying to provide a definition for them.
P zombie, I think, definitionally doesn't have any will. So
yeah, it doesn't have will, therefore it has no purpose.
Action, reaction.
Yeah. So what I'm ultimately trying to get across is that you ask the question, you cannot possibly verify that the world is not populated with automatons. The truth is that it is. Whenever I look around and I see you people or my roommates, you are automaton. You are biological machines that secure a genome and have a consciousness.
I think that's. I don't know if that's directly touching what we mean by P zombies here, though, because a P zombie.
No. I understand. What I'm trying to demonstrate here is that a non-random assemblage of parts, such as ourselves, can develop what we call this consciousness. And we can verify that right now. We're all here. We have come to this level of consciousness by a non-random process called natural selection. And just because we're not metal doesn't mean we're not biological machines.
I see.
And so what I'm trying to suggest is that given enough complexity to this automaton, thing, the presumption is that a P zombie has no qualia. What I'm challenging is that a P zombie could and would have qualia given enough non-random assemblage.
Well, the fact that the P zombie is an exact replica of you, I would say, I think what you're trying, if I understand you correctly, like the way that you look at it, it sounds like a sort of functionalist argument, which is this idea that when systems get sufficiently complex, they develop consciousness. Sort of like there's this famous book.
Not systems, because the system that is the universe is extremely complex and has no consciousness.
As far as we're aware,
this is why sometimes complexity deserves to take a backseat in certain discussions about design and another aspect, but perhaps
that's why I said
when we
non-random
talk about
assemblage.
Consciousness. I think one way you could come out of this particular juncture is to say that, at least Stefan and I would probably agree. I think we have in the past on an episode that it appears as though, and I would imagine we at least have some evidence for consciousness appearing to be an emergent property of physical biology, or of our what you would call parts that make us up. And so if you were to create this zombie imitation and it was physically a copy, then it would not be possible for it to not have qualia by virtue of those physical parts in which consciousness is emergent. Now, that's, of course, if we were to agree that consciousness was emergent.
Right.
Great. Yes, you've perfectly defined a what would you call? I think that's a materialist type. You're a type of
Here, I can
materialist.
join.
You sound a lot like a type B materialist,
It's A,
according to
B, or
Chalmers.
C. One.
Because yes,
I
and
think it's A
the
or
reason
B.
why I say that is what you're
Here.
saying now when you approach zombies is you say that it is not metaphysically possible for a zombie to exist. Because the point of a zombie is the
Mhm.
idea that it is an exact physical replica of you without qualia, without something it is like to be that thing. And if you're
Conceivable,
saying-
but
saying
not
metaphysic.
metaphysically possible.
it is not metaphysically possible, yes. So what
But I'm also willing to admit that I have gripes with that argument as well. And what I mean by that is, and what we need to talk about later, I think, is something in physics called an evolution law.
Mm.
And I'm not talking about biological evolution in this case. I'm talking about the evolution of a system. And so I think that this Chalmers essay has a lot of blatant disregard for some pretty big physics related things. That's my ultimate argument. I think that one, a P zombie given enough non-random assembly could and would have qualia. And in the absence of qualia, then the answer is that the evolution law is wrong for that. And like I said, we'll talk about those later, I'm sure.
It really seems like you and Stefan, it really seems like you and Bray have a very similar perspective on this. At the end of the day, you both sound like materialists, specifically ones that say the zombies are impossible. They're quite literally impossible. They can't exist. Because we're talking about physical replicas, like quite literally down to the particle, the same
Mhm.
being as Bray, and it's impossible for that being not to have qualia. But real quick, just take a really big step backward. We got into the types, but we should first approach like exactly what is the hard problem of consciousness. When we approach these types, we need to understand exactly why these types exist. Their responses. Their responses to a particular problem of phenomenal consciousness. Now, you see, when you have phenomenal consciousness, if there's something it is like to be you, it's extremely difficult to, let's say, explain that by empirical means. It's really difficult to explain and make sense of exactly how what does and what does not have phenomenal consciousness, and that is essentially the hard problem of consciousness. That is, if you hear that term a lot, you hear that phrase a lot, the hard problem of consciousness. That's essentially what it is. Why is it that I, Trevor, have phenomenal consciousness? My binary variable is 1, not 0. I have phenomenal consciousness, but this mannequin is 0. It does not. Exactly
Right.
how do you get to that? And the reason why it's a hard problem is because it's really quite difficult to reach that point according to in physical means, using an empirical process, using science. It's the reason why it's not a soft problem. And just to
Or an
buttress
easy
this
problem.
as well. Yes, they call it. I think he calls them soft problems, but I think easy problem it's interchangeable. An easy problem would be neural circuitry. Like I could like theoretically predict exactly what Stefan's about to say next, just getting a very good look at his very complex neural circuitry. Or I could look at like recently the fly brain the connectome was successfully mapped, an entire like via like many different histology maps, heat maps were created for a fly here at Berkeley. It was this big deal. And let's just say you could use something like that to exactly know where the fly is going to fly next. That's a soft problem of consciousness. It's a soft problem. The ability to elicit and break down free will, if that is what it is, would be a soft problem of consciousness. Just looking at the physics of what's occurring inside of your brain. What's hard to explain, just to go right back to where I started, is why does it have something it is like to be that thing? Why is there something it is like to be Stefan? I can look at his circuitry all day. I could fly around it all day. And I think it was Leibniz, it was either Leibniz or Descartes that said you can look around all day throughout this person's mind and you'll never once find his brain, and you'll never once find his mind. And I'm trying to connect that to this idea that it's really quite difficult to find out why is it that there is something that's like to be Trevor. Why does that happen? And that is essentially the entire reason why this essay was written. Now, before we move forward and get into the types of materialisms, I wanted to see exactly how y'all feel about this hard problem. And if you want to, if any of you specifically go, well, this entire idea is stupid, or if you want to rip the rug out from underneath it, or if you do think it's a serious epistemic issue, but not like a metaphysical one, or not one that we should really be worried about. I'm curious if anyone has any opinions.
How do you want to approach this? Like, do you want to look at the provided arguments against materialism, or are we going into the? Could you just
Well,
the
entire topic area is mostly
say-
just kind of like not practical, except for the question of, well, if I can physically locate consciousness, can I manipulate it? The rest of it is kind of this, what I will say, philosophical playtime topic, where it has. Well, that's what I'm saying. The one pragmatic route that I can think of is to manipulate and control the thing, right?
Well, why not? Why not just to understand it?
Because that's never why we. That's not how human beings work. When we have understanding of something, we then try to play with it.
Okay, yeah, that's just true. Yeah, okay, I understand what you're saying now.
Whether it's to navigate our world and make it less anxiety-inducing, which is a typical driver, or to explore creative impulses, we want to understand the world so that we can engage with it better.
That kind of reminds me, a broad inspiration for this paper initially was a 1937 paper by Bertrand Russell, where he talked about the intrinsic properties of fundamental substances or particles. And he had this whole argument where in physics today, and I'm speaking today in terms of 1937, so take this smaller than right now. But he had this whole gripe that physics looks at the relationship between objects, or the relationships between particles, or whatever it is you're studying, and not the intrinsic properties of the objects themselves, the particles themselves. And the reason why I bring this up is it kind of touches the whole point of physics, where it's like playing with. If I want to understand something, you necessarily have to play with something. And that's more or less what we're doing when we talk about, like, theoretically, if this is moving by this way, this is moving by that way, which is what physics does. When you look at it like that, understanding and playing with are kind of interchangeable in that sense.
It would seriously be the case that we're wondering about the hard problem of consciousness to produce predictable power. That's the whole point. That's the whole point in the fields of science, is so that we can more reasonably predict what's going on.
Yes, and setting that down, I wanted to start getting into the types of materialisms then, specifically the Type-A materialism. We'll start there. And I wanted to see exactly what y'all thought of this.
Sure.
Just to help the audience. If I remember correctly, and I want you to correct me if any of you think I'm wrong, this whole idea behind Type-A materialism is this idea that there is an epistemic gap between us and solving the hard problem of consciousness right now. But it can be closed. It will be closed, given work. That is essentially a Type-A materialism. So let me open that up a little bit more. Oh,
you said do or do not correct you.
Do correct me.
Oh, okay. I think you may have. It's on this. It says there is no epistemic gap between physical and phenomenal.
Yeah, I think you described Type C a moment ago, Trevor.
Oh, well, what I'm trying to say is, whatever we think is a problem, it will be solved. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And essentially there's this problem of, everything, and according to a Type-A materialist, it's a type of monism, or the idea that everything will reduce down into physicality or material. And basically what you think is the hard problem is just an issue of right now. And if you give it time, people will work on this problem and it'll reduce down into physicality once more. We will explain phenomenal consciousness, why things have consciousness, why there's something it is like to be you, reader, listener, unless you're like a language model, whatever is harvesting this data. There's something it's like to be you. And this Type-A materialist would argue, well, I can't do it right now, but like in principle, you will be reduced down into your physicality perfectly. And that's all there is to it. There's no problem with mental. There's no problem with qualia. Realistically, it's just that we don't understand right now. That's a Type-A materialist. Now, I know Bray, Stefan, I'm just going to assume you're both materialists, and I want to hear exactly if any gripes you have with this particular one, because I am very interested in materialism myself, but I really don't like this one, and I want to hear what y'all think.
Well, Bray, you go ahead if you have anything,
sure.
but I for sure have gripes. I have them written down.
Yeah, so I may need to sort of compare this one to Type B, since I seem to kind of jump to that one earlier, and figure out what the actual fundamental difference is, or that epistemic gap. There is an epistemic gap, but what they seem so similar. It's like, okay. I mean, at the Type A one, I get almost as a response to the first criticism against materialism about, the physical accounts do not explain all that there is to know. But like you said, Trevor, if given enough time and we do more research, et cetera, and have a more fundamental understanding of how the brain operates, then perhaps one day that can be explained. But what are we, to say of that right now? But yeah, perhaps the things that you all have to say will, elucidate that a little bit better.
Yeah, because so the issue I have with Type A materialism is like, well, it seems like a epistemic non-starter. Like you quite literally, well, how you can't explain why these lights are on or off inside the mind via empirical means. Like we can see that right now, and that's what science is. And therefore, Type A materialism can't be true because it's just a non-starter. If you can't explain it via physical means, then how could you hope to eventually? In principle,
You think it's putting the cart before the horse?
I think it's looking at the problem fundamentally wrong. Like if I can't explain why there is something that's like to be a prey, like period, like I just can't do it. It's just there is. At least I don't know for a fact. There's something is like to be me. That's what I know. I'm going to be Cartesian about this. I'm going to go all the way back, but I can't explain exactly who does and who doesn't also have this, or exactly how it works fundamentally. It's just I can't really approach that problem according to anything you can do using the scientific method, and then therefore it seems like Type A is a farce. If anyone disagrees,
So just to be clear, Type A, the argument is the explanatory argument, right? And we're talking about how physical accounts explain at most structure and function. Explaining structure and function do not suffice to explain consciousness. And so that's what you're saying here. Is I'm just repeating the argument against Type A, and that's what you just iterated here.
That's
and so
essentially
your conclusion is that Type A is bad, but the conclusion written here is no physical account can explain consciousness, which I don't like. I don't like it at all.
But how do physical accounts explain consciousness? Like how do you find yourself doing that?
We're here. I just cannot state this. I cannot overstate this. So my gripes on the early essay was literally the first claim in the first sentence is set up on the presumption. However, the author is slick and always talks about our conceptions and so forth. I looked him up on Wikipedia, of course, looked at what he's into and so on. Was impressed in some ways, was, disheartened in others. You know what I mean? And so, like, in the very first sentence of the paper, the whole thing, consciousness fits uneasily into our conception of the natural world. No, it doesn't. How about that? I mean, like, what do we do now? Like, what if you have enough scientific training? What if you're okay with that? What if you're okay with consciousness existing in the natural world? What if you're okay with that? What now?
Well, the problem is, like, I can't explain it.
Just because you can't, and just because Chalmers can't, doesn't mean that someone can or can't. You know what I mean?
But if you,
I'm not claiming that I do. I'm saying, what if it's the case that I'm okay with consciousness in nature?
What I'm saying is, if you can't like we've yet to have a scientific definition, a manner of doing that.
Sure. But what I'm trying to enunciate here is that the exact thing that you were just saying is that in the future, someone may understand this to a better degree than we do. Mm-hmm. Therefore, the very first sentence is just wrong.
Well, so here's where I disagree. I think fundamentally, when you get into it, in the future, what's going to happen is a whole lot of soft problems are going to be solved in this century, especially.
I
a whole lot of soft problems are going to be solved. But if you want to talk about why we're not considering,
but we're not considering, Trevor, like really, really large differences in understanding. And what I mean by that is, like, what if we have a total paradigm shift? What if we have a complete and total difference? Like I'm not saying science runs its course. I'm saying that, let's say, science brings into the forefront of our consciousness a new modality of thinking that we cannot at present understand. There's nothing you can say that, in other words, as much as you can say that it can't be done, I could say that it can.
I still don't understand.
Oh, go on. Oh, please do tell.
So what is a pithy summation? I want to have pithy summations of these types, whether that's just connecting them to existing ideas, which you can very much do for the latter half. That's pretty easy. But I couldn't quite get a lock on what the type A, B, maybe C made sense. But
all right, I can do that really quick. Well, first off, a type A materialist, as we were discussing, is this idea that you can eventually, you either can feasibly do it now or later, explain phenomenal consciousness, why things have consciousness, using a physical means. That is to say, using the scientific method and all of that. A type B materialist, listener, is this idea that it's not possible, epistemically possible, for you to escape out of the box and explain phenomenal consciousness. However, it still does reduce down into physical means. Like it does. It's a non-starter question. You'll never be able to do it, but that is what reality is. Reality is only physical, and I'm sorry, but you can't explain consciousness using the only means we have at approaching reality. And we're going to have to just sit with that fact that we'll never be able to explain it. It's just something that's an ontological non-starter. If you have knowledge, you have qualia. If you have qualia, you can't approach the qualia problem. You can't explain why things have qualia using scientific means. Then a type C materialist, I know less about. I know Stefan had some interest in the type C. I do know it was mentioned briefly in the paper that essentially it reduces into either type A or type B once you really press on it. I remember that. And then from there we start going into the types of dualism.
Right. Well, we'll cover those when we get to that half.
Yeah. So let's get into this whole type B materialism thing, because I'm specifically interested in it because it out of all the materialisms, it's the one that makes the most sense to me. Yeah. It's very feasible, and it's one of those things where we have the problem, and it's essentially an acquiescence where I say I can't solve this problem. I can't. It seems perfectly reasonable to me to say you just really can't explain qualia using science. Like, at what point can structure and function explain the intrinsic properties of my being? I can explain the structure, I can explain the function, but this is an intrinsic property of what it's like to be my being. And that just doesn't seem to be something you can break into looking at just structure and function. I'm basically doing the explanatory argument here. It's confusing, it's odd, it's infuriating, but this is essentially the answer that a lot of people give, especially people in science, because it's quite literally just to say that I just can't ever know.
In some way, my head's saying the shape of this is paralleling completeness. So if you have a very rigid system that is well defined, it necessarily can't explain all situations. What is that? It's the completeness theorem, or I know that's a mathematical thing, but it generalizes to axiomatic systems, which you could argue that, empiricism and like observance of reality as we do it modernly is very axiomatic. Um,
I see what you're...
So Michael, the easy way out is to say what you've already said in a previous episode. All models are wrong. Some models are more right than others.
okay, but at that point, are you saying a physicalist model has limitations? Or, like,
Yep.
which model are we pointing at
All
here?
models are wrong, no matter how close they are. They are wrong.
Right, but vis-a-vis the topic at hand, which is the Type-B materialism, where we acquiesce. What are we acquiescing on the grounds of? On the grounds of physicalism? Or, like, what?
Well,
one part of the Type B, one part of the Type B materialism is that the different, I was gonna say brain states, but I guess it's essentially the same thing. The phenomenal states can be identified through physical functions or states. So, and this is something we already do. We, take brain scans of people, and we can identify different parts of the brain that correspond to certain functions. If we disconnect or remove, in the case of a lobotomy, certain parts of the brain, then certain things no longer function or just simply cease to exist. And those appear to be directly associated with our conception of consciousness. Like if you were, I'm speaking as someone very ignorant in neuroscience, but if, let's say, you disconnected the occipital lobe from the rest of the brain, I imagine you could not possibly have any sort of perception of sight. You would lose that, and whatever else happens to be there, and you would have that sense perception no longer. But we would consider our sight and everything that we process from that sensory input to be part of consciousness. I mean, would we not?
Well, when you talk about
yeah.
consciousness, Michael, please.
So yes and no. Those are sense perceptions, but the sense of being, which is something that, like, I'm not talking about the sense of, oh, I feel my body. I'm talking about the sense of being conscious. That particular one, I feel like the person would have to be dead before you could extract any sort of meaningful sense of being disconnected from it.
The thing is, when we talk about consciousness in this context, according to this essay, it's a very binary thing. And the other properties or properties of consciousness is something we could talk about later, but it's a bit of again, binary. So you either have it or you don't. There either is something it is like to be gray or there isn't. And that's what we talk about, regardless of how many sense perceptions you add or subtract from this being. Either it has being or it doesn't have being. And that's essentially the hard problem that all these things are trying to interact with. The fact that you have being. And then we can talk about everything else later.
Put another way, there are practices where, you know how if you stare at a wall and say the wall is white, and there's like a green dot over here on the wall, that, like, if you look at it, you can see the green dot. But if you look and put the green dot in your periphery, and then you just kind of stare at the wall, you have this visual illusory effect where the green dot disappears, right? Your perception of the green dot is gone. The wall has become purely white in your perception. This also occurs in other phenomena, right? So, like, if you're having a conversation with somebody at a bar, and it's kind of noisy, but it's not too noisy, you white out. Your brain processes out all that extra noise, and you can focus on the conversation, and your awareness is concentrated on that. You can do that with a lot of your senses, actually. I would say the Gen Pop does not train into doing that with sight or smell or taste or whatever, but, like, you can, in fact, if you spend enough time on it, if you dedicate yourself to this task, you can, in fact, experience these kind of concentrational whiting out of everything else. And So the question is, if you can do that for all of your basic senses at once, there's still an isness there.
That's what
You can block out, huh?
I was literally like about to ask the question. I was like, theoretically, could we like hook someone up to life support and then disconnect all of the parts of their brain that
I have
function
a
for sense
philosopher
perception?
friend of mine who's in philosophy of perception, and I tried to make this argument once to him, and he got real upset. Like, it's really quite difficult to discuss these sorts of things.
Well, it's
like
highly
isness.
unethical, it seems like, but
well,
It's
that's
highly unethical.
we never talked about the ethicality of it. We just got into it.
You would also have to consider, if you did this,
Mm.
necessarily, I think your sense of time would become skewed, if not, quite frankly, weird.
Yes, certainly. It'll get, darkness,
I
imprisoning.
have no mouth, but I must
all that I
scream.
see.
But you.
Yeah.
Oh,
Can't hear
Stefan?
you, Steph.
Are you sure, Michael?
There you go.
Because we have well documented like coma patients who understand it's been a long time.
What's so
we
so
have an
that's a
internal
good data
sense
point,
of time.
actually. That's a great data point, actually.
One, this is really quite difficult because there is a difference here between something which had its sense perceptions removed and something which has no sense perceptions. And I think
Correct.
so I mentioned it really briefly earlier. It was Godel Asher Bach by Hofstadter, Douglas Hofstadter, if that's how you say his last name.
I do want to say, I just came up with that set of examples purely to highlight that when I'm thinking about these arguments, I'm thinking about that isness. The qualia, the sense perceptions, those are things that are like plugins. They're like attached to it in certain ways, but they are not necessarily the thing itself. The isness itself.
You could say
where Trevor's going is
sorry.
Go ahead, Trevor.
Fly in my room.
I was just going to say where Trevor's going is important because to make a delineation between somebody who has had sense perception and then it is removed versus somebody who is just the isness that Michael is describing may sort of reveal something about how we feel about the discussion as it pertains to, like, for me and Stefan, that consciousness is emergent. Like, could you what would the isness be like if such a being could exist from point zero with no possibility for sense perception? Can you have a thought without sense perception?
I would say to that, this is a beautiful line of questioning, and it comes right to this reference I want to make, because it's a beautiful analogy I could make now. This is great. So in this book, Godel Asher Bach, there's this whole discussion that Douglas makes that's really quite interesting, where he goes, well, what I think consciousness is, and they kind of use this analogy of like two mirrors bouncing off one another kind of recursively. And it's like this fundamental idea that you have consciousness, or the way to characterize you is you have being here, and you also have a relation between your state of being and some other state that you are currently relating it to. And the fact that you have at least more than mono, you're not just a mon one. You have a relation, a dynamic that you can compare one thing to another. You therefore have consciousness. If you're only oneness, if you're only this exact present moment with no past and no future, you wouldn't be aware that there is something as like to be you. And you could argue that that person couldn't possibly have qualia then. Because if your being has no relation from which to bounce off that being, then you really, it's a bit of a proto qualia. Like, you have the potential to make qualia, but until you have some sort of recursive effect, there's literally nothing that can be said about your own state of being. Like, I know one neuroscientist from Colombia or Argentina, I forget which, but he's like this interesting neuroscientist who thought that basically consciousness comes from the thalamus, which, if you don't know, it's a somewhat of a subcortical, not very subcortical, but it's like at the very center of your brain, and it's like right below your frontal lobe. And he has this idea that the pyramidal neurons that connect your thalamus to the frontal lobe, as things bounce off on and on and on and on between those two things, that is essentially the recursive mirror quality. And that's essentially what generates your sense of being and your sense of consciousness. The fact that you have a past and a present to enable you to create abstractions. And that's where some people argue why we have something it is like to be something and why a rock does not. It's a brain thing. It's something that the brain is
Mhm.
currently doing. And I bring all of this into the table to say that I don't think there is something it is like to be a rock.
No, there can't be. And
I do.
what I would right.
Glory. All right, we'll get to that part soon. We'll get to the monism soon.
So in these early sections of the essay that we're talking about, I wrote down that the author needs to be careful in his admission of thinking consciousness is irreducible. Okay, and I want to talk about this. So we've been talking about how, okay, maybe consciousness is something that can be explained later, right? Maybe not. Okay. Maybe we can't explain it. Let's just assume that we can't. All right. Let's bend over backwards completely and just say there's no time in which we will be able to explain it, consciousness. Does that mean it is irreducible? No, it does not mean it's irreducible. And the reason why I say he really needs to be careful about this is because, and by the way, keeping in mind the time frame at which this was written, he sounds awfully close to evolution deniers of the time period. We had clowns like Michael Behe at that time talking about irreducible complexity, and it would be so foolish to like if we all at once knew that Chalmers was an evolution denier, we could pretty much throw out what he's done. I'm sorry, but we could. Okay, but he's not. We know he can't be. If he's any kind of educated person, he can't be. And
So
in the paper, he did say that we're not discounting these, the physical, stuff about this. But my point is that if the claim that consciousness does not fit into nature, if that's the claim, then we can falsify that hands down. We're literally right here. If the claim is consciousness does not fit into nature easily, then we can talk. Do you see what I mean? Consciousness cannot be an irreducible thing. If it were truly irreducible, that would open up this whole Pandora's box about so much that is just completely not evidence-based, nothing you can say about it, blah, blah, blah. For example, if consciousness was truly irreducible, that would intimate, that would make us infer that consciousness came from somewhere other than the material universe, and that's just not true. It can't be. Where did it come from? Heaven? Has he put us in luminous bodies? This, that, and the other.
monads.
You could literally
The monad.
You could literally just say maybe it came from Platonism. Maybe there's this super consciousness that feeds it. No, there's not.
The water, man.
Again, it is very much the case that you could posit anything you wanted without evidence, and that's not good enough. We have left that behind.
Yes.
I'm
really sympathetic to what you're saying, and if I understand you correctly, and just to buttress Chalmers against what you're saying at the same time, you're saying, if I understand, it's ontologically, metaphysically impossible for consciousness to be irreducible. Like you can't, in principle, say that. What I think Chalmers
what I am
is saying
saying is that, let me just reiterate, what I am saying is that let's just assume for a moment that consciousness cannot be explained by human cognition. It can't be. That does not mean that it is irreducible.
Then I understand you correctly then. Because that is to say, I agree with that. It's epistemically, this is the thing. It's basically like saying that ontologically it's reducible, but epistemically it's not. It can't be. That's the issue. And I think basically that's what Chalmers touches on whenever he gets into these types of materialisms. I think he just thinks it's epistemically not possible because you can't knowledge your way out of it. Your barrier between you and it is impossible, but it's still happening.
That's the whole key between. That's the whole through line and key between materialism A, B, and C. In his types, he's saying that it's an epistemic problem, not a material one.
Yes.
And I genuinely don't understand how you could fit into any other camp as an educated person.
I do
You know,
think
and that's
that makes you a
that's what
very
we're kind of here
rock
to
solid
discuss.
type B materialist. I would say you're quite
Sure,
like there, if I understand you correctly. And
sure.
I wanted to go off from this and go ahead and dive straight into the dualisms now. I mean for the four of us, like materialism is quite delicious, but just to move on a little bit, we're going to go ahead and skip Type C because I've been looking through it on the side and it really does reduce into the others. It just says that in principle, it is eventually possible. That's really all that says. So it's more or less becomes a Type A or a Type B. It is true to say. So we're going to go ahead and dive into the dualisms themselves. Now, I'm really curious if any of y'all have any thoughts over the Type D dualism. Type D. Now,
Let me check my notes real quick.
Type D as in dog.
that is
Yeah.
correct. It's the one that kind of does substance versus property dualism.
This says that microphysics is not causally closed and that phenomenal properties do play a causal role in affecting the physical world.
Yes.
This is what I was getting into at the server with earlier yesterday.
This is a weird one. Yes.
Yeah, I'm trying to make sure I understand this correctly. I mean, I get the first part, microphysics is not causally closed, but how it means that phenomenal properties can have an effect on the physical world.
It's basically this idea that there are these two separate, distinct, irreducible substances, mental and physical phenomena, and they influence one another. The physical world influences the behavior of the mental world, and the mental world can change and alter the physical world.
Okay.
So it's a bit like, you can think of it, Bray, specifically against you. There is the physical world, and it impacts you, Bray. You have these sense perceptions, and it impacts your decisions. But at the same time, you have a mental qualia, your phenomenal consciousness. And your phenomenal consciousness can make decisions which then change, edit, and alter the physical world around you. That would be a Type D dualist. Now, the issue is like, I just don't know how to interact with it because
The logical endpoint of that silliness is that if we all believed real hard enough, you know, we could do whatever we wanted. I mean, you know, and it's not true.
if I solved all the soft problems of consciousness, like if I really get into neuroscience and just really really explain things, then this interactionism kind of makes less and less sense. It's this idea that that the mental can regard and change the physical, but if I can, the physical world can explain itself. Like you don't have some sort of, well, I don't know this, but it doesn't seem like everyone has like a numinous essence that is outside of the physical phenomenal world, or outside of the physical world, like a phenomenal world that then just like comes in like a fingertip into the universe and impacts it and then alters it in some way. It seems much more like you are physical, you are stardust. The universe around you is stardust. It's all stardust, and stardust does what stardust does.
Well,
That's kind of the regard I usually give it.
Sure. I think Type D is the default position of religion.
Yes,
If I'm being honest with you.
I completely agree.
And look, here's another big honesty that I'm going to put out there. I read very carefully into the Type A through C and the arguments against materialism. But in my notes, I literally have it here. I skimmed Types D and so on because I want you guys to give me like your word on them. My point is that as an academic, I look at this paper, I make it as far as the arguments against materialism, and I want to quit. I mean, you know what I mean? Like that, like in my head, I'm literally telling myself there's no point in continuing with this. And that's not just a bias, people. That's not just me being prejudiced against the author and his beliefs. That's me literally saying, if you do not accept the material world, then there's no compromise you and I can make. And anyway, so Type D, I know people or new people very well who truly believe this way. They believe that if they shake heaven's door down, if they beat the pearly gates in, they can get what they want, including several private jets and millions of dollars, and they will blame God for that. they will blame a personal god for that. And anyway, that's what I have to say about that.
See, Trevor?
Oh no, please, Bray.
I was just going to say that looking at this Type D dualism, I'm trying to say this in a way that's not going to immediately have Stefan pull out a gun and shoot me, but it almost seems like if you just forego the sort of language that's baggaged with this, that necessarily there has to be some mental state that is not physical, or basically that, if I see an advertisement for food, or I see an attractive figure on a billboard or something, or I see something that is going to cause me to think about something. If I'm let's do the food, for example. If I'm driving down the highway and I see a billboard for a Big Mac from McDonald's, suddenly I start feeling hungry, or I start thinking about food, and I'm going, that would be really nice for me to get a giant, incredibly unhealthy piece of slop. Then we could definitely say that there is some physical, how's it worded here? Physical, would that really be a physical state? I mean, there's definitely something physical that has caused a phenomenal state in me. I can say, it would not have happened otherwise. It's a simple stimuli or response, is what I'm trying to say. But the problem with this dualism is that the second that you start saying that there's some irreducible part of the scenario, that's where I have an issue, because by all means, I can see a billboard, something physical that causes a phenomenological change in myself that then motivates me to go and get a hamburger, which is then again the phenomenal state causing something to happen in the physical world. I don't see an issue with that. The issue is that we've defined something, part of that is irreducible.
Yeah. It's a real issue. If you can explain everything according to physical means, like if I could really get into it and just explain exactly how the billiard balls are going to line up and crash with one another, and also the billiard players, like it just comes down to just physicality. If I don't have a soul per se, it's just I'm stardust, and my stardust does what it does, and whatever reason has an attribute of consciousness. If that is what I am, then it seems like everything fits within the purview of the physical realm. And it's really quite difficult to talk about this interaction, this finger pressing on the scale effect that consciousness has on reality, if really, truly, you can just explain it with billiard balls. Now, the problem right now is I can conceptually describe all of this. This is kind of a God of the gaps thing, where I of course, don't know this with the billiard ball players. I don't know.
That's fine.
I can't really jump in and just say that, okay, we're going to understand their brains and know exactly what they're going to do next. I couldn't begin to say that. But I could say conceptually, that's the purview that we're in. That's the look that we take. And we've yet to find reasons beyond the hard problem of consciousness, which this isn't touching. This whole interactionism, Type-B Materialism, or dualism isn't really touching. It's touching on essentially soft problems.
An easy problem again.
It's crashing into easy problems, because all the things that it says that phenomenal consciousness is doing to you and changing in the world is really stepping and trotting on the toes of what science can do. And that's an issue, and I think that kind of invalidates the entire principle. And unless anyone has any thoughts, I really wanted to talk about Epiphenomenalism, the next one, which I actually was for a couple of years. I found it really interesting. So without further ado, Type-E dualism, that is to say Epiphenomenalism, is a very different perspective. It's still a dualism, but different all the same. And I'm worried, or I'm curious if you three will find it interesting, or the audience. Oh, by the way, audience members, whoever's listening, if you want to write down what your perspective is, are you a Type-B materialist? Are you a Type-E dualist? Or a Type-A monist? We'll get there. Write it down in the comments below and just tell us exactly why you think that way, and then we can have people reply and disagree with you. It'll be incredible and fun. But so Type-B Epiphenomenalism, it's this holds that phenomenal properties are ontologically distinct from the physical properties, but However, the phenomenal world, your consciousness, has no effect on the physical world. Now, to detail this for you, wonder how well this will come out. I'm
That
using
is
a
so
sharp
much
pen.
more fair than
Yes.
type D.
It's a bit like this.
Well, type D, from a type E perspective, type D is getting caught up in the sense perception of thought
Yes.
and believing that the thought is the thing that is observing.
Right.
Yes.
So this is where we get into. I would pithily describe type E as like a whatever you want to call it when people start talking about the observer or like mindfulness or like any sort of like
I
noting
totally know what you mean now.
or
Okay. Yeah.
it's I mean, I won't say it's entirely just from this class of thought, but like it's definitely touches on the same thing that Buddhist thought gets into.
Seriously, I'm fairly certain Sam Harris is an epiphenomenalist. Like he goes
He has to
all
be.
the way into it because he goes like, okay, well first just
The
to
Hindus
describe
also
it.
hold this at a certain point.
Who do?
Yeah. The like the like I don't remember the proper term, but like Hinduism in general. In that
Well,
the observer state is, I mean, that's the Atman kind of experiencing the world. But anyways,
sure. And just to really get into it, talking about epiphenomenalism, I just want to finish this definition. If you look here, it's probably hard to make out this idea that there's this physical world which is on this side over here. Those of you who can see this, on the that's my right, your left.
so you have a circle on the right side of a piece of paper with
There
an
you go.
arrow coming off of it, pointing to a circle on the left side of the piece of paper.
Yes.
And then
And that
flowing
left side, yes.
from that circle on the left side, you have an X that is, I'm assuming, implicative of a third
power
state
of
that is
one.
not shown.
Not a
X
third state, no.
apostrophe, I think.
It's a lack of interaction. So basically, it's this idea that there's the physical world, and it influences what happens in the phenomenal world. So your physical senses, as well as the soft problems of consciousness, the neuroscientific happenings in your brain, are eliciting this phenomenal consciousness. But what that phenomenal consciousness does and thinks to do is only an after effect, an aura around a physical process. That is what epiphenomenalism is. To visualize it by analogy, please.
So about type E, and once again, you know, realize that I skimmed, and this is why I wanted to do this, so that I would have these questions and so on. So if what I'm going to call the material world can affect your phenomenal world, right? That's type E. And then type E also posits that your phenomenal world cannot affect your material world at all?
Yes,
correct.
It has no influence whatsoever.
Well, in the sense that,
yeah, in the sense of what?
So to model it for you, your experience of things, your experience of isness, of the world, your experience of qualia, all of that, that is maintained by this epiphenomena of consciousness, which is just simply put this function of observance or awareness of things that are being put into that awareness. Everything
like you're
else,
on a roller
including
coaster
the
ride,
thoughts
but you're not
that,
driving or something. I don't know.
even
You're just
including the
watching.
thoughts of logical processes about experiences that are observed. So it's almost like you're 2 layers deep. So you've got the physical world producing sensory inputs, and then those sensory inputs arrive as qualia, and those are processed, and you have thoughts about that and impulses, and you know, none of that is the consciousness that we're pointing at here.
Yes. So
right.
To give you a cool analogy that I really like, I want you to imagine a television screen, an old TV, let's say, where like you can almost count the pixels on it. You know, like it boots up, and each one is like a certain color, and basically they move and change, move and change. Well, nothing moves, just pixels, colors change. And then across the entire TV screen, it creates the appearance of an old Western, like this old movie. Now, it feels as if there's this phenomenal thing happening, this Western, but it's entirely has no influence. This Western, what's going to happen next in the next scene, has more to say about the pixels themselves on the television screen, what they're going to change to next. What the Western will not influence the color of these pixels on the television screen. The pixels will do what they are coded to do, and the Western is just a aura around it that has no bearing or influence on what the pixels themselves are deciding to show.
It's an
So
abstraction.
basically, it's completely subtracting free will out of everything. It is the physical universe, and it gives off these auras that you could call consciousness, phenomenal affairs happening all around. But at the end
Phenomena
of the day,
that,
it all
that occur
reduces down into physicality.
into your
So-
awareness.
My original question was going to be framed like this. Going back to Bray's Big Mac, all right? Bray
I'm glad I can always
sees the
ground
Big Mac,
things in.
you know, gets hungry, and then goes and gets a Big Mac, okay? How does that, like and that's the simplest version I could come up with. Explain to me and the audience
I'd be happy
how
to.
that wouldn't violate Type-B.
Yeah.
Because
Okay. No, this is fun.
well, because
I-
think about it.
We hit
he-
Michael's Pee-wee button.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
but you know, he sees the big,
Mhm.
golden arches. Then those
Yes.
golden arches are doing the little smoke fingers going, come
Absolutely.
and say, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
so he
Like this.
has this qualia, this deep personal connection to the capitalism, all right,
Oh,
that he
no.
loves and he knows he loves.
I
Yeah,
should not
his
have been the one to bring this
his
up.
central his CNS activates. He's like, oh, tummy rumble.
I mean, his neurons activate, and
and then he experiences a thought, perhaps an impulse.
yes,
Yeah.
and then he decides out of that qualia to go consume a Big Mac.
He
Is that not?
experiences the decision occurring.
Yes.
Yes.
You,
Yes.
you have to disassociate
So-
the ego.
Well, it's
yeah.
like Michael
Yeah,
said,
you-
you're 2 layers down.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So even the experience of witnessing a conclusion being drawn in
Mhm.
this particular model of the world is an observation. It is not being.
Yeah.
There is no will here.
Mhm.
There is an observation that so it's almost like, okay, think of us as pea zombies, but then there's like this little thing that is able to hit a debug interface on the pea zombie and observe its internal state.
Mm.
And how the automata, how the gears are moving, how the sensory perceptions are being processed internally.
Well, so that necessitates the question: Can Michael? Can we opt out? Like, can we not press the button that says I would like to observe the internal state of my pea zombie, of my
Well, that's called
avatar?
nirvana. You're describing nirvana now.
Well, yeah. So that's, or maybe not nirvana.
Is this
There's
not
terms
just
for that. So
Inside Out, the movie?
Yeah.
well, yeah, but there's they put a guy in an MRI machine. He was able to do some interesting things neurologically that they were able to record. I'll send that to you guys later.
Yeah, send that to me. Yeah.
But yes, so to answer your question pretty directly, I mean within Buddhism, that is considered to be an attainment and like something that people do every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It is a recorded phenomena
And I've
insofar
listened-
It's
I've
like a
listened
deep
to Sam
state
Harris's
of samadhi or something. Yeah.
I've listened to Sam Harris's book, and without like trying to sound whatever. I mean, like, so there are 2 situations I can point to in my personal life that it does feel like I do not have my hand on the button, so to speak, or and the button is observing the internal states, right? Just make sure we're getting the analogy correct.
Yes.
Number 1 is by force of will. Okay, so like not force of will. That's not the right way to say it, but literally stepping back, taking myself out of the equation. And Sam Harris's book helped me do that. I'd done it a few times before, maybe by accident, and he explained that in his book as well, and it put articulation to it that I could understand. Which book was that?
Probably free will.
No,
Maybe?
it was like stepping back or something like that. I can't remember.
Waking
anyway,
up.
Yeah, maybe that was it. 2, and dear listener, anybody out there who can identify with this, you have my sympathies. Dissociation. Like I don't, I don't know how much
Yes.
you guys have hard dissociated. I hope as little as possible, that sort of thing. But whenever you dissociate hard, it's like your physical body is genuinely trying to tell you, I don't want you right now. I genuinely do not want you to observe my internal state. Thanks, bye. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm framing this in the way of Type E. I'm using this language so that we can get a point across. You know what I mean? I still don't agree with it. I'm just saying, like, it makes a lot of intuitive sense, but our human intuitions are really bad.
This is this is the reason why I'm so sympathetic to epiphenomenalism, because it kind of feels right, and it kind of touches on this whole physical phenomena being this primary thing. It's hard to disagree with for me, and it's the reason why I was an epiphenomenalist for a couple of years. It ends up not being what I am now, and we'll get into that in a second.
Sure.
But it's a really chewy set of thoughts and reasonings, especially for somebody who was previously like a Type-B materialist. Like it's really difficult to speak on what exactly what the phenomenal world is for a Type-B materialist to me, because it's like there's still this phenomenal world, it seems. And epiphenomenalism, I think the difference between epiphenomenalism and Type-B materialism is this notion for an epiphenomenalist that the phenomenal world is irreducible and is this thing that is happening.
Yeah, I don't agree with that.
Well, there you are.
But you see, that's the exact part I don't agree with. You know what I mean?
You are
like the irreducible part and the not material part. Everything else seems to be great.
Well, here, let's assuage you a little bit, and let's just completely disconnect from epiphenomenalism, because now I can talk about monism, specifically panpsychism. We can get really into that, because I think that it might satisfy your qualms with this whole psych, where exactly qualia is coming from. So the notion to type F monism, and David Chalmers he doesn't try to hide this. He is in fact most interested in monism, type F monism here out of all.
To quote him at the beginning, I believe page 2, I will not pretend to be neutral in this discussion. I think each of the reductive views is incorrect, while each of the non-reductive views hold some promise.
That's exactly right.
And that's why he's a clown,
All right. All right. So monism, to get into this, basically, let me just read this definition here, because I think it's quite good. So type F monism is the view that consciousness is constituted by the intrinsic properties of fundamental physical entities. That is, by the categorical bases of fundamental physical dispositions. All right, that second half was kind of funky, but the basic point is that qualia, what it is like to be something, like the phenomenal consciousness definition, is a fundamental attribute of fundamental part of fundamental objects in space. So if you go down to the most fundamental, down to just particles, quarks, whatever you want to say,
or the fields that they,
yes, it's a field. It's characterized as a field. There's a field attribute. So this is all. If you don't know, just to start this, Bertrand Russell back in 1937, I mentioned it a little earlier, had this whole thought about intrinsic properties, and like how we argue that physics today doesn't really speak on intrinsic properties of things or of objects or any particles or whatever else that exist, and instead look at the relationships between objects, exactly what they're doing in space in relationship to other objects, structure and function. And basically he stated that one intrinsic property of these fundamental substrates or fundamental particles in the universe was consciousness, qualia. And that could explain this whole philosophy of mind problem that we have now. It's this idea that at every level there are these fundamental attribute of consciousness, or starting just base here. Russellian panpsychism, that's essentially what this is the fundamental attribute of every particle is consciousness, which explains why there is consciousness. It aggregates together to form beings such as yourself, myself, Bray, Michael, so on. Now this has problems. I'm just going to go ahead and start and just announce the problems, and then we can get in.
The first
I can also
of
tell
which
you
is
who
that
he's
this was made in
cribbing.
1937.
That's the one first issue Stefan nailed.
Is
Michael.
this going to be there's something it's like to be a rock?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
And the rock is not aggregated enough to produce
So this is an interesting.
Yes,
so
that's
it's not
level
saying,
1 rock.
It's not. So it's actually quite fascinating. If we wanted to remove some of the terming from it, so it comes off more neutral, so you can kind of observe it a little bit. So what it's saying is there is a fundamental like grounding of reality, and that fundamental grounding is the same thing that produces consciousness at certain complexities or at a point in aggregation. But it is also the same thing that physical components of. So the trick is, I don't want to say physical components of reality because it's still, they are defined in this model as part of this grounding. It itself is arguably physical. But the things, so as far as like we're aware, our current understanding and model of things stops as far as you get down to about fields. When you start talking about particles and fields, that's about
that
as
more or less
small as
makes
we get.
sense.
So let's talk a little bit about like the real issues with this problem, this Russellian panpsychism, because I just want to say firstly, there is a lot of depth, a lot of ongoing discussion on this frame of reference and philosophy of mind, this whole panpsychism thing, and the main issue that you see brought up is something called the combination problem. Now let me explain what it is. It's this idea like, okay, fundamental particles have an intrinsic property of consciousness. The idea is that they aggregate together to form things such as you or I. But now this is going to be infuriating at first, but this is how the argument's given. It seems as if you have one cohesive self. That's how this argument starts. We can disagree with that, but we're going to start with the argument. It seems as if there is a sense of selfness, like there is existence in you. And if it is so that things aggregate together to form you, well, how exactly does that happen? How do smaller consciousness, not subconscious, according to the initial argument, everything has fundamental consciousness. If they aggregate together, how do they aggregate together? How does that even happen? How do multiple forms of consciousness come together, or multiple, not forms, but just multiple consciousnesses aggregate together to form something like you? How do they combine? How do you composite something into existence like that? And that is essentially the full counter-argument to Russellian panpsychism. And that leads to some follow-ups, some really weird ones, such as something called pan-protopsychism. It was mentioned very briefly in the paper.
I might actually have been accidentally describing that one, but...
It's a good one. I like that one. There's also cosmopsychism, where you can get terms such as cosmic consciousness, like Deepak Shakti, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And you also have functionalism. So let's get into this. So first things first, I just want to explain the one approach to the combination problem that panpsychists give called pan-protopsychism. I want to see what y'all think. So in pan-protopsychism, the idea is that these fundamental particles have a quality of consciousness that is a capable quality of consciousness. That is to say that it's potentially possible that they can get consciousness, a proto-consciousness.
Each electron has 1,000th of 1,000th of a percent of consciousness. That's what it sounds like to me.
Well, that's the issue, though, because that still insists that there is something just like to be it. Like, it's a binary variable. That's the issue here, really. It's either 0 or 1. So it can't be 1/1,000,000th. It's either you have it or you don't. So if you were to say a particle has consciousness...
But is that true?
Well, go on. That's pulling the rug out from under the entire conversation, because now we're talking about phenomenal consciousness.
Whether you have it or you don't. I mean, if you want to talk about type
Is that
F,
a false dichotomy,
Yeah.
Because, I mean,
talking about...
for example, are dolphins as conscious as us?
Well, that's...
Or do they have a different consciousness?
Yes. But is there something it is like to be a dolphin? Is there?
Yes.
Well, then there you go. That's the binary variable. The fact I'm willing into existence this notion, but I'm now using this notion. It's a good notion for this sort of thing, because now we can talk about whether or not electrons have this notion. You do have a point that there very well could be degrees of consciousness, and insects aren't the same as humans, aren't the same as artificial intelligence if it has this, if
Sure.
it even does.
Yeah.
But this is still, I think, a valuable way of measuring things. This binary off-or-on variable. It's a question we can ask, and if we ask this question of electrons, if you say 1/1,000,000th of a consciousness, that's still consciousness. If there is
Right.
something just like to be an electron, then there's something just like to be an electron. Like that's a binary, and that is essentially the issue of pan-protopsychism that it's trying to take. It goes, well, they don't aggregate together. There's nothing just like to be anything until there is, and that's what you are. That's a pan-protopsychist argument where they say that the intrinsic property of neurons or particles is the ability to have consciousness, and then once
Right.
they aggregate in certain ways, consciousness is created. And this kind of connects to this whole point I was having earlier about the thalamus, how you have this recursive mirrors between like what is and what is not, and now you can know. There was pure being before. The rock has being right now.
The rock has constitution. It interacts
Yes.
with, physics.
Yes. Well, it exists
Right.
right now. The particles that assemble it exist. But until there is a notion against being of what is not, or some notion of becoming, essentially, if you have some sort of notion between current existence, suchness, and the notion that you have suchness, you have to have both. You have to have both suchness and the notion that you have suchness. If you have both of those, then you can be aware of the fact that you have suchness. But without it, you're just this present moment. And you can't know anything.
Type F was the way it was particularly described was hard for me to wrap my head around up until I tried playing with this idea, and I don't remember if it's described like this, but if you take the presupposition, you build this model of a world where consciousness is some field, and then it particulates out into particles, and then those start assembling and becoming more complex. These motions of what are interactions like in that field's consideration? That's where it gets weird to me. Is like, okay, so if one electron and another, like if two particles are interacting, is there a playbook? Is there like what the
Well, so I think
how does that connect back?
I think it's worth mentioning that we have no evidence for a field of consciousness.
No, you're correct.
No, we don't.
The closest thing that we would have is the electromagnetic field. And why do I say that? Because if you consider that all the information in your brain, where I'm sure we could all agree is where consciousness has its seat. Like in other words, you might be your.
I have a terrible, but continue.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that, like, if we go two doors down, if we go 2 levels deep, like you're talking about, that's fine. There would be this phenomenal world, so to speak. I would call it the simulation software in your brain. You would call it qualia, maybe, whatever. It has to be in the brain somewhere, all right? And the brain is made of things that interact with the electromagnetic field. That's what I'm trying to suggest. And so that very digital information is concentrated in this space right here that we call our head. That's all I mean to say. And so these electrons or these whatevers are interacting across this field. Well, they're part of that field themselves. They, and they have this charge or whatever. It's not the interaction. It's not the particle itself. That's true. That's what I'm trying to get to. It's the limitless interactions between the particles interacting across a field that would give us this material basis.
To talk about a little bit about this whole field thing again,
I
how we
like
can't
that.
prove it. I think it's connecting to the whole Type-B materialism thing, I don't think you can ever speak to it because it's a problem of qualia. It's a problem of qualia with these consciousness fields. It can only ever be theoretical. It could never be proven. It physically can't be. It's an issue.
Yeah, and therefore it doesn't
problem.
exist. That's what I'm trying to suggest.
Well, if you're a Type-B materialist,
I don't care what type of person you are. If no evidence, no claim.
Well,
I mean,
what I'm trying to say here is like you could.
Well, it's not
your
a
argument would be
defensible. It's
invalid.
not a defensible claim, but it doesn't make it false. That's not how
that's
truth
exactly
works.
what I was about to say. The fact is, it's an indefensible
I didn't
claim.
say it was false. I said no evidence, no claim. If it cannot be falsified, it cannot. There's
certainly
literally
the
once
truth
again,
value is
Pandora's
null.
box.
It kind of reminds me of monads with Leibniz. Is anyone here familiar with monadology? Like this whole thing that Leibniz did? It's terrible, and I hate it. And I had to give it a description on it in a class. And basically, it's this really, really, really complex idea of how there are these mental substrates of the universe called monads. It's a bit like an early form of panpsychism. And they aggregate together to form more and more complex things. But they don't actually interact. There is no physical world. It's just the interactions between these monads. It's all mental in a sense, but at the same time, they directly interact and interact with such a perfect way that it creates the universe. And I bring
that's
all
what
this
I was
up
kind
to
of
say,
getting from Type F here. Actually, was that if you said that this ontological font, this field, is like information itself, or like
the interplay between parts of this field are the very digital information.
And then if you said okay, when a baseball bat hits a baseball, what's happening is as you zoom down, these interactions are just occurring because these are processes that are occurring within this mental field or whatever, this psychic.
well, that would be a kind of
That's exactly what I'm trying to say. No evidence,
because
no
the
claim.
physical properties of these things, or rather the role that they play in the conception of this field, say that this repulsion phenomena is going to occur, and then when that scales out, when you bring that to its logical conclusion, the baseball hits the bat, and then you have Newton's laws taking into effect.
So one thing I would say to that though is that it's not just mental qualities. It's instead this. If you look at it like from a Russellian panpsychist viewpoint, it's kind of flips the whole thing about is it this or is it that on its head, because it says that it's physical and it's the same thing. Physical is mental. They're interchangeable terms.
I could tell you.
Physical property has that. Yes.
That's cribbing, or at least definitely saying some of the same stuff that Hermetic texts in occultism say.
Yeah,
that's
actually, that's quite valid. No, that's a very valid point to make.
That's the precise reason why we shouldn't trust it.
No, all right. It's an interesting rabbit hole to go down, and we're reaching the end. We only have a couple minutes left before we usually end, and I wanted to maybe we could just wind down here, but I wanted to mention very briefly this whole idea of cosmopsychism since I brought it up. It's this idea that if intelligence or consciousness is this thing that has to that can't be explained by combination, like particles don't combine to form consciousness. There's this whole argument that flips the whole combination problem on its head for panpsychists. Instead, they say that the entire universe, there is something just like to be the entire universe, and then that universe decomposes into its many waves, kind of like oceans. And you can look at each individual wave. And each individual wave is itself one aspect of the total consciousness. That would be a Michael. Say what?
That's Gnosticism.
I was about to say that's literally the
classical
Parasophia or whatever. Yeah.
Well, that's
the pleroma,
cosmic consciousness. Yes.
Yeah. You're saying the universe is the pleroma, and then considered as the whole, it's the monad, and then as the emanations filter down, you get this. Yeah.
Yes, and that's exactly what cosmopsychism is now, and that's one direction that people are taking in Russellian panpsychism in this philosophy of mind discussion. And just like that, I want to leave that in the audience's head. I don't know if we have time to really break into it, But I wanted to close off.
False.
Thanks. Just to close off, starting with Bray. Bray, how do you feel? What do you think? And here a nice little goodbye.
I don't know, all the stuff you guys just talked about for like what felt like 30 minutes all just sounded like midichlorians to me.
Well, no, it is, Bray. Like, I don't think these clowns know how much I know
Damn.
about Gnosticism and esoterica and whatnot. And like I said, it's this precise reason that it sounds like this babble that we should not credit it.
Yeah,
I mean,
the Jedi Council hates this one trick for increasing your midichlorian count and expanding your consciousness. But yeah, no, it's actually been a really fun discussion to listen to. I'm glad that we had some experts, so to speak, in here to kind of expand upon the stuff that David Chalmers wrote about. Consciousness is actually a fun discussion if you have it with fun people.
True.
So
that's right.
Yeah,
and...
I don't know. I thought I'm definitely I would consider myself a materialist, but I understand the viewpoint from which the monasticism and what were the other ones?
Monism,
I get
phenomenalism. Yeah.
What did I say? Monasticism?
Yes, you did.
You did. Being a monk.
I was about to say monasticism
I can
is
understand
not
the
the same
monks.
thing.
Well, they may not be mutually
we
exclusive.
need
but,
to attenuate.
Right? Yeah,
they're related.
I need to sweep an old.
The other basically anti-material. I understand where they're coming from. I just think that well, they're wrong, and also that I'll sum it up this way: the consciousness discussion, compared to many other discussions in philosophy, seems like one of those things where the differences between opinions are all very heavily concentrated right next to each other, as opposed to being completely diametrically opposed, like way out here. And I think that's part of what makes it really interesting, is that it feels like the person who disagrees with you is just like
that
right
far
there,
off. Yeah.
like, well, but you're just calling it this differently, or you're just saying that, you know, so. And maybe that's something to speak upon, how much that we don't know yet, or maybe that we do know everything already and we just don't know that we do, or, you know, whatever.
Well, Bray, at that last sentence, I have to ask. You don't have to answer, but I have to ask. Would you consider yourself as a materialist, a type A, a type B? Where do you feel yourself on this one?
Honestly,
yeah, everybody should drop that.
Yeah,
don't feel like the difference between all of them is very important, because it all seems like such a temporal distinction. Like how do you feel right now about what kind of materialist you are?
No one's gonna pull this up in a transcript 10 years from now.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I guess type B. Because for you have to, basically the difference between type A and type B is that you have to decide whether or not there is an epistemic gap between physical and phenomenal truths.
Yes.
And that seems like you have to make a decision based on, is there still more to be discovered about what we would need to know to solve this problem, or is there not? And it feels foolish to say that we know everything that there is to know, so I guess I would have to say that I would be a type B materialist.
All right. Well, just like that, we'll leave that type B materialist aside. Move over to Michael. Michael, how are you feeling about this episode? Where do you find yourself now?
I had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun. If you're asking me, well, I enjoy the interplay. I get off on connecting ideas to each other. That's my bread and butter.
Big time.
So, Type E is very, very fun to look at. Honestly, probably at this point, I would mark it up as I don't have a conclusion, but if I'm going to be playing fair with the rest of everybody else committing to something, I'll say Type F.
That's fair. Well, why are you? Well,
because I have no evidence for any of them, and that's the most entertaining one.
There you go.
All right.
Hey, at the end of the day,
That's
From a
fair.
functional perspective, Type E is probably the one that I operate on the most,
Yes.
but Type F is fun to play with.
Yes, yes, it is. And with that, Stefan, I really want to hear you close it. How'd you feel, and where are you going?
So I have in my notes, I don't understand how you couldn't be a Type C. Like, it seems to be the default position for anyone who knows what they're talking about. You know, and look, people, y'all know I say these things with love. Like, I mean, very few times in my life have I said, things like this and meant it to hurt people, of course. But like, just reading off of it, right? According to Type C, there's a deep epistemic gap between physical and personal domains, or phenomenal. Same thing, personal. But it's closable in principle. So, like I say, I feel like it's the default position. It's like, okay, we know that there's this gap, and maybe we will converge on closing it. That doesn't mean we'll ever close it. It just means we will get tighter and tighter on it by incremental material scientific discovery. People, there's no such thing as the not material world. It is literally immaterial. All right? And, if that puts me in the camp of type A, B, or C, just don't really care. Maybe that's a false trichotomy developed by Chalmers. Like, we really have to think about that,
Right. I mean,
now,
that's
I'm not saying that now, truthfully speaking, there probably is just those three, because let's think about it. There's a phenomenal gap. Excuse me. There would be a epistemic gap, but not an ontological one. An ontological one would belong to the type to the immaterialists. And then anyway, so there's probably only three logical conclusions, but anyway, my point is that I belong to one of them, and C seems to be the default position.
So I'll close off. I really like this episode. I feel most interested in type F monism. So I guess it's kind of a split between the materialists and the monists, technically we're all monists. All four of us are monists then, because monism is this notion that everything reduces down into one irreducible substance, and as delivered by Descartes. And basically, a materialist is just one that believes that everything reduces down into physicality. So we're all monists. But speaking specifically of type F monism, I'm most interested now. Used to be a type E, but I've moved over into type F, specifically a pan-proto-psychist, where I think once the brain starts doing its thing, then we can start knowing that we know, and that's the distinguishing characteristic between myself and a rock, and why I wouldn't be just a plain panpsychist. So with that in mind, I think I have to say I'm really honored by the fact that all of y'all had really good reasons and arguments for why you believe what you believe, and the fact that I couldn't directly disagree. I kind of get what you're saying there, Bray, and Stefan, same thing, and Michael, you as well. And I really appreciate the fact that we had such a well nuanced discussion, and it can still end with four more or less different points of view. Michael and I closest, but still. So with that in mind, listeners, everybody, thank you for listening. Please leave your comments down below as to how you felt about the whole thing. I'd love to see a few people pull the rug out from under and disagree with the entire concept of phenomenal consciousness or anything like that.
I'd love to see a solipsist in the comments.
Yeah,
oh
you know who
God.
you are.
Don't let me keep me off them.
Yeah, very
but, hey,
good.
I would like to say one more thing. We were saying something about no one's going to bring this transcript up in 10 years. I hope that Bray and Trevor are running for president one day. Okay. And the floor for education in America has gotten so high that the moderators are going, Trevor, you once claimed to be a monist. Can you elaborate? And then Bray goes, yeah, my good friend Steph, my campaign manager said, yeah, right. I should call him out as a clown for being a monist.
The whole audience is just laughing.
Yes, very educated audience, all laughing.
Oh,
That would be
great.
a great
All right.
bit video, like two
Yeah.
philosophers running for president, and all the questions are completely like out of the ballpark of normal politics.
Yeah,
Yes,
this,
I mean, like the deepest, most arcane shit you've ever heard, you know, and
Yeah,
the whole audience
sometime in
is
20
just as educated as they are.
You once said that everything is derived from water. Can you elaborate?
No. And just I
No.
Thales my way out of here. Just all right. Well,
That's wrong.
I really appreciate y'all coming out, and all of you have a wonderful rest of your day. Peace. Be good to each other. See you later.